I'll verify the names to avoid, then write the story. The forbidden names are Helen, Frank, Claire, Gavin, Marcus, Denise, Patricia, Dorothy, Nora, Callum, Theo, Irene, Beverly, Sandra, Margaret, Vera, Liam, Robert, Rosemary, Judith, Gordon, Paige, Andrew, Sylvia, Douglas, Cassandra, Eleanor, Audrey, Arthur, Meredith, Wayne. Now, writing the story with fresh Canadian names and setting, the pension from 31 years of teaching grade 4 in Winnipeg was never going to be enough. I knew that the moment I sat down with the papers after my husband's funeral and actually looked at the numbers, really looked at them, not the way you glance at a bill and tell yourself you'll deal with it later. Gerald had handled our finances. That was simply how we divided things, the way couples of our generation did, not out of helplessness on my part, but out of habit, out of a life built on routine and trust. And then, one February morning, he didn't wake up, and I was 62 years old and suddenly in charge of everything, and the numbers on those papers told me that the house on Inkster Boulevard and the life I'd been living inside it were going to require some adjusting. I'm not someone who falls apart. My mother raised 4 children in a 2-bedroom house in the North End, and she didn't fall apart, so I wasn't going to either. I picked up 2 shifts a week at the records office of the Misericordia Health Center, filing, data entry, the kind of quiet administrative work that suited me fine. It wasn't glamorous, but I liked the purposefulness of it. I liked having somewhere to be. The trouble was the hours. My shifts ran until 10:30 at night and the Route 21 bus stopped at 9:45. I'd taken it home twice before realizing I was the only person at the stop and that the walk from Portage to Inkster at that hour in November was not a reasonable idea for a woman alone. My daughter Philippa, she lives out in Kelowna now, has for years. She'd set up one of those rideshare apps on my phone the previous summer when I'd visited her. I'd never used it. I'm not the sort of person who takes a new technology easily, but I figured out the buttons, requested a ride, and a gray Subaru Forester pulled up within 4 minutes. The driver's name was shown on the app as Desmond. He was somewhere in his mid-60s, I guessed, with close-cropped white hair and the kind of careful, unhurried way of moving that reminded me of men who've learned not to rush things. He confirmed my address without fuss, and we drove through the dark Winnipeg streets mostly in silence, which I appreciated. When he dropped me off, he said, "Take care now," and it was such a simple thing. But he said it like he meant it, and I noticed. The next shift, I requested again. The same gray Forester appeared. I thought nothing of it until the 3rd time, and then the 4th. And then I began to understand that Desmond was logging on around 10:15 and positioning somewhere near the health center, making sure he'd be the one to pick me up. I didn't say anything about it. I wasn't sure what to say, but I started watching him more carefully. His hands on the wheel, the way he held his shoulders, and what I saw was someone tired in a particular way that I recognized. Not sleepy. Tired from carrying something. We started talking somewhere around the 3rd week. Small things. The weather, which in Winnipeg in November is always worth discussing. The road construction on Portage that had been ongoing since what felt like the Trudeau era. He told me he'd driven truck for 22 years. Long haul, prairie routes mostly, sometimes as far as Calgary. He'd had to stop 2 years ago because of his eyes. Something with his peripheral vision that wasn't bad enough to be called a crisis, but was bad enough that an insurance examiner had flagged it. He didn't say this with bitterness. He said it the way you state a fact you've made your peace with. "And your family?" I asked one night. I don't know why I asked. It came out naturally. He was quiet for a moment. "My son's in Saskatoon, we don't talk much." I didn't push. I know when not to push. I started bringing him coffee. There was a decent machine in the staff room, and I'd make 2 cups before heading down to the entrance, tuck one into a cardboard sleeve, carry it out when his car pulled up. The first time, he looked at it for a second before taking it, like he was deciding whether to object. "You didn't have to do that," he said. "The walk from the building to your car is about 30 seconds, I said. "The coffee stays hot that long, it's no trouble." He accepted it, and after that it became a thing we did. I'd come out with 2 cups, we'd drive through the Winnipeg dark, and the conversation got gradually deeper, the way conversations do when you stop performing and just talk. He told me about his ex-wife, that they'd separated 8 years ago, that it had been mostly amicable, that the distance between him and his son was more complicated than the separation itself, and had to do with things he hadn't handled well during the years he was on the road. "I missed a lot," he said. You tell yourself it's for the family, the money, keeping things running, and then you look up and the kid's 26 and doesn't know how to talk to you. I told him about Gerald, about the strangeness of living in a house where every system and habit had been built for two people and now had to be rebuilt for one, about Philippa, who called every Sunday and worried about me and suggested I move to Kelowna at least twice a year, and how I couldn't explain to her that leaving Winnipeg would feel like losing Gerald a second time. "You're good to talk to," Desmond said one night in December, pulling up to my house. "I don't say that to a lot of people." "Neither do I said, and I meant it. It was a Thursday in the second week of January when something changed. I noticed it the moment I got into the car. Desmond's hands on the wheel were different, gripped, not resting, and when he looked at me in the mirror, his expression was the kind that people put on when they're deciding how to say something difficult. We drove in silence for a block, then two. "Lillian," he said. He always used my name, which I'd told him on the third or fourth ride. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." My stomach tightened. "All right. Your next-door neighbor. The one on the east side. The house with the dark green door and the pickup in the driveway. Do you know him?" I blinked. The house with the green door. "Kenneth Prasco." I didn't know him well, only to weigh that, the sort of neighbor you acknowledge without knowing. He'd lived there perhaps 3 years. Kept to himself. Shoveled his walk, which I'd always thought was a point in his favor. "Not really," I said. "We've nodded at each other. That's about it. Why?" Desmond didn't answer immediately. He turned north instead of west, away from Inkster. "Desmond, where are we going?" "Somewhere I can talk to you properly." His voice was controlled but tight. "I'm sorry. I know this is strange, but I need you to hear me out before I take you home." He pulled into the parking lot of a Tim Hortons that was closed for the night, the interior dark, the lot lit orange by a single sodium lamp. He put the car in park and turned to face me. "I picked him up," Desmond said. "Your neighbor. 3 weeks ago, a Saturday night. He was drinking, not falling down drunk but loose. The way people get when their judgment goes before their coordination. He was on the phone almost the entire ride. At first I was just driving, not paying attention, but then I heard him say an address." He paused. "Your address. 1147 Inkster." The cold came up through the floor of the car. "He said it twice," Desmond continued. "The second time he said it, he sounded angry. He said, and I'm telling you his exact words, 'The woman at 1147 is going to be a complication. She's already too close to it. We have to sort this out before she connects anything.'" "I don't understand," I said. My voice came out steady, which surprised me. "There's more." He reached for his phone and opened a notes app. The list of entries went back weeks. That was the first time. After that, I started paying attention whenever I saw his name come up in a request. I've picked him up 4 more times. Always late, always drinking. The conversations are always watching, timing, whether someone's home. He looked at me directly. "Last week he said she works Tuesday, Thursday nights. Home by 11. I need to know what she has in the house." I sat there. Outside, the sodium lamp hummed. I watched a piece of ice blow across the empty lot. "He's been watching my house." "I think so. And I think he's been watching your schedule specifically." Desmond's voice was very even, the way you talk to someone when you're trying not to frighten them more than necessary. "Lillian, I don't think you should go home tonight." "Where am I supposed to go? A hotel?" "A friend's. Your daughter, if she's reachable." He held out his phone. "These are all my notes. I want you to look at them, and then I want to take you to the police." I took the phone. The notes were precise. Dates, times, fragments of conversation, license plate observed twice on the street near my house after midnight. There was an entry from 2 nights ago, truck parked across from 1147, lights off, engine running, 1:47 a.m. Stayed 22 minutes. "You drove past my street," I said. "I drive past it most nights on my way home. Habit, I suppose?" He said it without embarrassment. "And 2 nights ago he was there, just sitting. And tonight, Lillian, tonight before I picked you up, I drove past again." He stopped. "Tell me." "He was standing at your side gate, the one that goes to your backyard. He had a flashlight." The coffee I'd drunk at 9 o'clock threatened to come back up. My side gate. The gate I'd been meaning to put a padlock on since Gerald died and never had. He was in my yard. At the gate, he heard a car and went back inside his house. But he was looking at your property. Desmond's hands were steady on his knees. I sat down the street for 10 minutes and watched his lights. He didn't come back out, but I'm not comfortable taking you there tonight. I thought about the gate. I thought about the empty rooms in that house and the fact that every light on a timer and every locked window didn't change the fact that I lived there alone. I thought about 31 years of teaching 8-year-olds and how good I'd gotten at staying calm in front of people who needed me to be calm. Take me to the police, I said. The Winnipeg Police Service non-emergency office on Portage was quiet at 11:15 on a Thursday night. A young officer took our names and brought us to a small room with a table and 4 chairs and a whiteboard that still had someone else's case notes on it. An older detective. She introduced herself as the staff sergeant on duty, a woman probably 10 years younger than me with short gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, came in partway through and listened without interrupting. Desmond gave his account first. He'd been keeping notes from the second time he'd heard Prasko mention my address. He had the entries dated and timed. When the staff sergeant asked why he'd started documenting rather than reporting immediately, he said simply, "I wanted to be sure I wasn't misremembering. The first time could have been anything. By the third time, I was sure." She asked if he had anything beyond notes. He did. He'd started audio recording his rides after that first incident, not for this specifically, he explained, but because a passenger had made a complaint against him the previous spring, unfounded, but it had cost him a week of earnings to sort out, and he'd decided to protect himself going forward. Passengers consented when they accepted the app's terms of service. He had 5 recordings of Prasko in his vehicle. The staff sergeant's expression didn't change, but her posture did, very slightly. They set up a laptop and Desmond transferred the files. We sat in that room and listened to Kenneth Prasko's voice. I'd heard it before, briefly, across the property line, and I recognized it now, talking about timing, about whether I'd noticed anything yet, about what would need to happen if I had. In the clearest recording, he said, "She's been going through the old stuff, the SACE files, the paper records. If she puts it together before we move the account, we're going to have a real problem on our hands." The staff sergeant paused the recording. "Mrs. paused the recording. Elliot," she said, "do you have any idea what he might mean by that? The SACE files?" I started to say no, and then something came up from the back of my memory, something I'd half noticed weeks ago and filed away as a clerical puzzle rather than anything significant. "Caisse populaire," I said slowly. "We have several elderly patients who receive care through the health center's community outreach program. Some of them still do their banking through the local caisses, the credit unions. I process their billing files." I stopped. 3 weeks ago, my supervisor flagged some discrepancies, charges that had been submitted but that didn't match the service records. We thought it was a data entry issue. There was one file in particular. A Mr. Arsenault, 81 years old, lives alone in Elmwood, where a charge for home care services had been submitted twice, different reference numbers, different dates, but the same services. And the physical file? Missing. We've been looking for it. I felt the pieces arranging themselves in a way I didn't want them to arrange. Kenneth Prasko, what does he do? The staff sergeant glanced at the younger officer. "According to the address you've given us," she said carefully, "we'll need to verify. But if you can tell me where you work and give us his full name, we can pull what we have." They did. It took 15 minutes. When she came back in, she sat down and folded her hands on the table. "Mr. Prasko is a registered care aide," she said. "He works for a private home care contractor that services several health centers in the city, including yours." The room went very quiet. "He goes into those homes," I said. "He would have access to clients, to their paperwork, potentially to their financial information, depending on how the visits are conducted." She looked at me steadily. "How many discrepancy files have you found so far?" "We've confirmed 4. There may be more. The audit is ongoing." "And all elderly, isolated clients?" "Yes." I thought of Mr. Arsenault, whom I'd never met but whose file I'd held in my hands, 81 years old, living alone. People who wouldn't necessarily notice a double billing or wouldn't know how to dispute it. The staff sergeant stood up. We're going to need you both to stay a bit longer. And Mrs. Bout, Elliot, you won't be going home tonight. We'll arrange somewhere safe for you. They put me in a hotel near Polo Park, one of the Marriott properties off St. James, a room on the 3rd floor with a deadbolt and a chain lock that I used both of. Desmond waited until he saw me go through the lobby doors before driving away. I lay on top of the bedspread in my coat for a while, too wound up to undress, staring at the ceiling. My phone rang at 6:40 in the morning. It was the staff sergeant. She'd gotten a warrant in the early hours. They'd searched Prasco's house. We found records, she said. Paper files, removed from their original locations, going back approximately 18 months. We've also found a laptop with what appears to be fraudulent billing submissions. We're still going through it, but preliminary count is 19 clients. Total value of the fraudulent claims is significant. We'll have a better number in a few days, but it's substantial. I sat up on the edge of the hotel bed. Outside the window, Winnipeg was gray and snowing lightly, the ordinary morning of an ordinary city. He's been stealing from them, I said, from people who can't protect themselves. That appears to be what we're looking at, yes. He's been arrested. He'll be held until a bail hearing. She paused. You should know the recordings from Mr. She glanced at her notes. From your driver are going to be central to this. Without those, we'd have had nothing to act on. You're both going to need to give formal statements, and you'll likely be called as witnesses. Desmond picked me up from the hotel that morning. I hadn't called him. I'd called Philippa, who had cried, and I'd said I was fine and meant it, mostly, but somehow he was there when I walked out the lobby doors at 8:30, the gray Forester idling at the curb. We drove through the snowy streets without talking for a long time. How did you know? I asked eventually. To keep notes, to start recording. Most people would have just thought, drunk man. Ignore it. He was quiet long enough that I thought he might not answer. Then he said, my son, when I told you we don't talk much, I was making it sound simpler than it is. When he was 19, he got involved with someone who wasn't good to him. A man he worked with, and there were signs of it. Things I noticed when I was home between routes. Things that felt off, and I told myself I was reading too much into it, that it wasn't my place, that he was an adult. His voice was level, but something underneath it wasn't. It went on for 2 years before he finally got out of it. By the time it was over, he'd lost his apartment, his savings, most of his friends. He told me later he'd wanted someone to notice. He'd wanted someone to ask. I watched the snow. I wasn't there, Desmond said. I was on the one between Regina and Medicine Hat, and I told myself I was providing for my family, and in the meantime, my son was struggling and nobody who could have helped was paying attention. He glanced at me briefly in the mirror. So now I pay attention. When something doesn't sit right, I don't talk myself out of it. I write it down. I keep records. Because I know what it costs when someone who should have been paying attention decided not to bother. We were on Inkster now. Police tape still cordoned off the green-doored house next door, bright yellow against the gray morning. My house looked ordinary. Small. Safe, the way things look safe right up until they aren't. You saved my life, I said. Or at least you saved Mr. Arsenault's file. And probably more than that. You made it possible, he said. You talked to me like I was worth talking to. You brought me coffee in -20 weather and asked about my day. He pulled up to my front walk and stopped. Do you know how many passengers I've had in 3 years who asked about my day? 4. You were one of them. So I was paying attention, Lillian, because you made me feel like it was worth being present. That's the thing you don't know you did. I sat there with my hand on the door handle. Come in, I said. I'll make proper coffee, not the machine stuff. He hesitated. Desmond, come in. He came in. We sat at my kitchen table with real coffee and toast with butter and honey. Gerald used to say there was no problem that good toast couldn't make slightly more bearable, and I find I still believe that, and we talked for 2 hours. Not about the night before, not mostly. About his son, about Gerald, about what it means to rebuild a life after something important ends, and whether Kelowna might actually be nice, and whether he'd ever considered that his son might be waiting for him to be the one to reach out first. The investigation took 4 months. Kenneth Prasco had been running his scheme for nearly 2 years, submitting duplicate and fraudulent billing claims for home care services rendered to elderly, low-income clients. Most of them, the investigators told me, living on OAS and GIS. People for whom $400 was a meaningful loss. 19 confirmed victims. Fraud totaling just over $340,000, some of which had been flowing through a secondary account that Prasco's brother-in-law, the person he'd been calling from Desmond's car, managed from out of province. They were charged together. I testified in April. Desmond testified as well, his recordings and notes admitted as evidence. Prasco was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 6 years at Stony Mountain, with restitution ordered. His brother-in-law received the lesser sentence on the conspiracy charges. By then, Desmond and his son had had a phone call. Just one, but it had lasted an hour and a half. He told me about it the following Tuesday evening, his hands relaxed on the wheel for the first time in months, something in his face that had been closed for as long as I'd known him, slightly, carefully open. He said he'd been reading about the case, Desmond told me. He saw my name in the news. He called me Dad. His voice caught, just briefly. He hasn't called me that in 4 years. I didn't say anything. Some things don't need a response. I'm 64 now, still working 2 nights a week at Misericordia, though I've been asked to join the Audit Compliance Committee, which is a different kind of work and one I found I'm rather suited for. The gate at the side of my house has a proper padlock on it. Philippa still suggests Kelowna, and I still decline, but less firmly than I used to. Desmond doesn't drive for the app anymore. His son came to Winnipeg for Christmas, the first time in 6 years, and during that visit he mentioned a logistics coordinator position with a small trucking firm that didn't require a medical clearance for driving. Desmond took it. He earns more, keeps better hours, and every few weeks he comes for dinner. He brings good wine. He washes up afterward without being asked, which Gerald also used to do, and which I have always considered the true measure of a person's character. Last month, I was doing my intake review on a new client file, an 83-year-old woman in St. Vital, home care beginning the following week, and I noticed that one of her billing reference numbers matched a format inconsistency I recognized from the Prasco files. I flagged it immediately, sent it up the same afternoon. Turned out to be a data entry error, nothing more, but my supervisor said I caught it in a way that no one would have 6 months ago. I know why I caught it. I catch things now because someone caught something for me, because a man who'd been made to feel invisible by the world in general decided that I, specifically, was worth seeing clearly, and then taught me, without meaning to, that this is the thing worth doing, paying close attention to the people in front of you. Small kindnesses are not small. I know that now in a way I didn't before, not at this depth. The coffee I brought to a car window on a cold Winnipeg night cost me nothing except the choosing of it. But it was the reason someone was paying attention the night it mattered. It created the conditions for my safety, for 19 vulnerable people getting some justice, for a father and a son beginning to find their way back to each other. Be the person who notices. Be the one who asks. Not because you'll always be repaid for it, and not because the world owes kindness any particular return, but because the person across from you is carrying something you can't see, and your moment of attention might be the thing that keeps them from carrying it alone. Or it might, one January night in Winnipeg, be the thing that keeps you safe. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since that January. Not in any grand or mystical sense. I'm too practical for that. Too many years of marking grade 4 spelling tests to have much patience for vague philosophizing. But in a very plain, observable sense, what you put into the world tends to come back around, not because the universe is keeping score, but because people notice how they're treated and they act accordingly. I brought Desmond coffee because it was cold and he was working, and it cost me nothing except the small effort of remembering that he was a person. That's all it was. I didn't do it to earn anything. I did it because my mother taught me that the measure of a decent person is how they treat the ones who can't do anything for them in return, the ones society has a habit of looking through rather than at. Desmond was, to most of his passengers, a function, a service, a rating out of 5 stars. I just tried to see him as a man, and because I saw him, he saw me. He paid attention to the details of my life, my schedule, my street, the rhythms of my comings and goings, not to surveil me, but to protect me. He kept notes because he'd once failed to keep notes about something that mattered deeply, and he had decided he would never again let inattention be the reason someone he cared about got hurt. That is what I mean by character built through experience rather than instruction. Desmond didn't become a careful, attentive person by being told to. He became one by living through the cost of not being one and choosing to do differently. That's the part that stays with me. Not the arrest, not the court case, not even the 19 people who got some measure of justice because of what Desmond documented in the Notes app on his phone. What stays with me is the image of him sitting in that parking lot off Portage, hands on his knees, telling me something he clearly hadn't told many people. Doing it because he thought I needed to understand why he'd been paying attention. He wasn't asking for credit. He was explaining himself. There's a kind of moral seriousness in that. The willingness to account for your own past failures honestly without dressing them up, because the truth of it is the only thing that makes the explanation mean anything. I think about Lillian of 2 years ago, the one who sat at the kitchen table with Gerald's papers spread out in front of her and felt the floor tilt. She was not a person who expected to need protecting. She was a former school teacher with sensible shoes and a deadbolt on the door and a daughter who called every Sunday. She thought paying attention meant being careful, locking the windows, not walking home alone after dark. She didn't understand yet that paying attention is also an act of generosity, that noticing the people around you, really noticing them, is something you offer as much as something you practice. Desmond taught me that. I'd like to think I gave him something in return, even if it was only the reminder that his attentiveness was worth something, that the habit he'd built out of old grief was actually a form of grace. If there is a lesson here, and I'm cautious about tidying life into lessons, because real experience is usually messier than that, it might be this: the small disciplines of decency compound over time. A kind word, a cup of coffee, the choice to look up from your phone and actually register the person across from you. These are not grand gestures. They don't feel significant in the moment, but they create conditions. They establish the kind of relationship where someone thinks, I should tell her, I should make sure she's safe. And sometimes, in ways you will never be able to predict or engineer, that is precisely what makes the difference. Be decent in the small ways. Stay attentive. It matters more than you know.